So far, what we've done with all these things, except for the 90-second rice, is we hydrated it, and then we either steam heated it or pressure cooked it to sterilize it. Okay. Well, why do we do them in 2 separate steps? Because I don't have I can't, this is the information I have. But for white millet, which is basically bird seed, if I live around a farm type country or whatever, I guess. So there's feed stores all over the place. If you can get to a feed store, they'll buy, like, dog food bags, how they got a small bag and a big bag. You can buy a big bag of whole grain white millet, probably like $20 or something. Now I'm not saying this is for bird seed, because bird seed is milo, millet, and a bunch of other things, you know what I mean? I'm talking about getting pure millet. If you get that, then you don't have to, you can hydrate and sterilize all in one step. For every 2 grams of millet, use 1 gram of water. Throw it in the pressure cooker for 2 hours, and you could probably do that in 90 minutes. And you have not only hydrated, but sterilized the millet, all in one step. But they sell plastic bags that are made special for pressure cookers and people growing mushrooms. Now, if you move to these bags, you'll start making, bigger. They're a lot bigger than a jar, you know what I mean? A jar is a quart usually, and these bags are like this, they're giant. So to pressure cook something, like for this millet, it'll take 2.5 hours for a big giant bag, if you're putting big giant bags in there. But if you're putting quart jars in there, you can probably get away with 90 minutes. So you gotta watch what you're putting in, like how dense it is, how big it is. A little jar like this with grain in it, this is 350 milliliters. That's about 1/3 of a quart, 1/3 of a quart, or 1/3 of a liter. That's going to take less time than doing quart jars, because you have less insulation, you have less, it's a smaller amount of time to get to the center of this than it does to the center of a quart jar that's a lot thicker. Why can't you do it with these other ones up here? Well, you can do it with those, but you'd have to experiment to figure it out. You'd have to, every time you sterilize something, do it. Let's say I wanted to do bird feed or oats. Bird feed is kind of a bad example to try this on, because it's a mixture of stuff, and that mixture can be different from one quart to the next. You know what I mean? But for something like oats, let's say it's all oats. You just basically put what amount of water you think would hydrate it, right? And the next time you're pressure cooking something, throw that jar in. See what happens after 90 minutes. You know what I mean? When you take it out and shake it, is it too wet? Or is there water pooling at the bottom of your jar? Is the grain sticking to the glass? Or is it too dry? You just keep doing it over and over. Take the grain out and put it on some paper towels. Is it too wet? Is it perfect? If it's too wet, then the next time you're sterilizing something, do another oats jar, but do a little less or a little more of water. That's all, until you get it right. Then you'll know. You'll know how many grams of oats it takes for, how many grams of water to hydrate and sterilize in one step. That saves a lot of time. Okay, so let's go over everything I talked about. Basically, I just said you have to hydrate the grains by boiling at a simmer. I said you have to sterilize with steam or steam and pressure, and wait for it to cool down, tighten the lids, and then put in a sterile still air box. If you're going to use micropore, use micropore or parafilm, to wrap around like right here. And remember, you do not want to open the lids or, loosen them up a little bit until you spawn them. Okay? Until then, you leave these lids closed, you leave them in a still air box. Now, I wanted to bring up in the last video about germination, and this video, you can see in this video I said when you take a sample, it's about the size of your fingernail. That you would throw into the spore to spawn, to throw your mycelium into the grain to spawn it. But when you're trying to isolate mycelium, into a single strain, you want to take small, tiny samples. Like if I was to take a sample out of here, I would just get a little tiny sample. Once it's pure, then you do whatever. But when you're trying to make it nice and pure, you take little tiny samples to transfer them to another plate. Okay, now what was the sense in putting the aluminum foil on top and on bottom? The reason why you put it on bottom and you cover the whole jar is so that the light does not touch the spawning grain or the mycelium. Okay, the top cover is to keep contamination away from this, loose lid. Or if you have micropore, I guess you don't need the aluminum. But when you put it in a pressure cooker, it's always good to put the aluminum on there because it also, stuff will drip off the lid, and it just helps keep everything safer and together. Since I loosen my lids, I need that on there, that aluminum. It helps to, keep contamination away from the lid. What are the best grains? This is just an opinion, on a lot of this stuff here, what's best. The truth is, anything is good. As long as it's a grain, it'll work. That's a fact. But my opinion, with no pressure cooker, popcorn, the type that humans eat, not from a feed store, or Uncle Ben's minute rice, where brown whole grains. But I'm sure that's expensive. I've never bought it, but I'm sure it's expensive as heck to be doing it that way. You know what I mean? Instead of like big bulks of stuff. Uncle Ben's just comes in like a single serving or something, or maybe a double serving, I'm guessing. And if you have a pressure cooker, I would suggest using Millet. It has smaller pieces, so it has more surface area. There's been actual tests where they, not someone just at home doing it, but people in a lab who took a single strain, meaning they cloned it, and they used those clones to do experiments. If you do experiments and you compare stuff, like one day I use a different mix of food or nutrition for my mushrooms, and everything goes great. Well, that might have been genetics. You don't know it's useless to do that unless you have a clone strain that you're, experimenting with, so that they all are the same. So it's all just an opinion, but they have done experiments. Millet is the second best. I think it was rye berries maybe. But they were close. This was a close second, Millet. Like I said, I like how it's small grains, a lot of surface area. That means when you break it up, you're going to have it's going to have a lot of contact between the mycelium and the grains instead of a lot of big empty spaces. But it's all just an opinion. I mean, it's all grain. Grain is grain. You know what I mean? Now, there's two types of jars, mason jars. There's this kind. As you can see, it has like an indentation on the top. And then there's this kind that is kind of like it's straight up and down. You see how this has the indentation. This is straight up and down. I suggest getting the straight up and down ones. It's a lot easier to get your stuff out. I know you'd think it's a bigger hole, more contamination, but the lids are almost the same size. It's like, I think I used these back in the day, but I'm switching to these. Now when you spawn these mycelium in your grains, you're going to shake these grains up twice in its lifetime, okay? Once to spread everything around so it grows faster, and then you won't touch it again until you're getting ready to fruit. and you're getting ready to take this out of the jar. And usually what I do is I shake it up, right? Shake it up so that, so it'll be just a big solid clump. The first time you shake it up, most of it will be grain. Only like 25% will be mycelium, so that not all of it is like a brick. Because the mycelium, it gets thick like a brick. So when you're getting ready to fruit, this whole jar will be like a brick. Trying to break it apart is almost, I'm not going to say impossible, it's not impossible. But it takes a lot more banging on it and stuff. If you have an open jar, it's a lot easier to dig out. That's why I say I'm switching to the open mouth ones instead of these kind that have like indentation right before the lid. Also, when you use these open mouth ones where it doesn't have the indentation, the brick of mycelium usually shrinks. You know what I mean? So you can shake it up and it'll move back and forth in one big brick. But trying to get it out of this indented thing where it gets smaller at the top, it's like impossible to get it out, so you can, squish it with your hands and stuff. But with this, now I've never used these, but I assume that the brick, since it can slide in there usually, I remember that, once you take the lid off, you can just slide it out and break it up with your hands. Now here's what I got, a little thing of birdseed. I just got it to show you guys. You can see the different types of grains. There's a whole bunch of different grains in there. The smaller grains are the milo and millet, but you can see they have corn in there. They got sunflower seeds and milo and millet. A bunch of different stuff. It's called Burger's Blend. But you can go to a feed store. You can go to a feed store and actually get pure milo or pure millet or pure whole oats. So I ordered 10 plates, Petri dishes online for $30. It's $3 a plate. I got ripped off. I don't know if you can see that. There's like a 5mm crack in between the top lid and the bottom. And don't get me wrong, these are supposed to be loose fitting, but they're not supposed to be like this. I mean, look at this. And the second thing is, look at the top. The top touches the table if I set it down. Like that's not, it's supposed to be like a few millimeters above the table, above the bottom. So when you set it down, it doesn't touch the table. This will touch the table. This is going to be, it's going to be impossible almost to microfilm this, or parafilm this, and get it so it's a closed system. And I see a lot of problems with these Petri dishes. But they're glass, and I'm just going to have to learn to live with it. I mean, it's actually, easy to contain your cultures with, Petri dishes. So even with this, even though that's going to screw me up a lot, I should be able to handle it. See, there isn't really that big of a problem with this. The problem is that I bought some parafilm like this. As you can see, it's only a 1/2 inch in diameter. Okay, and this is really cheap. And if it was a regular Petri dish where the top only came halfway, 3/4 of the way down on the plate, you could easily, and then you didn't have this big giant gap, you could easily use that parafilm. It's cheap. I'm going to have to go, because regular parafilm is like, I think it's like 2 inches thick. But that stuff is like so expensive, it is unreal. But I guess I'm going to have to buy some. And then it will easily, because you can put that on and it'll not only take the side, but you'll have some of it, because it's really stretchy. You'll have parafilm all the way on the top and the bottom if you want. Okay, well, I hope I covered everything for how to hydrate and sterilize grains for growing mushrooms. Next video will be on how to actually do the spawning. How do you spawn the grain now that you have it hydrated and sterilized? And if I missed anything, in this video, I'll try to put it in the next video. Seems I'll have a great day, and remember, science is great.